So how can I know I'm hearing from God? His trustworthy word. We still got a big problem though, right? How do I know God's good? I get that you're saying this reveals God, but how do I know this book that reveals the truth of who God is and what he's done? How do I know that this God is good? We continue this story. I mean, just read verse 2 again. Abraham's hearing from God. Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. If this doesn't make you squirm, you've got some bolts loose. If this doesn't make you go, what? Something's probably wrong. It's okay to look at this and go, and ask the question, why would God do that? Maybe the thing that is more frustrating is like, why would Abraham just go and do that? Is he not like Westboro Baptist people who read obscure texts in the Bible and go pick at everything? He's a crazy person? Is that not what Abraham's doing? It's okay to ask those questions. You need to ask those questions, and then you need to dig into what's really going on. Why did God ask Abraham? Why did he not ask, go tell him. Why did Abraham get up the next morning? Some of you fathers are probably ticked that he's like, he didn't even say anything? He just got up? Yeah, he got up the next morning and he went. Some people will tell you that the story of Abraham is basically this. God reveals himself to you, and he can tell you to do whatever he wants, and don't ever question it, don't ever think about it, just do it. That's the point of the story. How many of you in Sunday school maybe heard something like that? Or through reading through this on your own, kind of like you came to that as like, I don't know what to do with this. Maybe that's it. God says something, you just do it. And that's the point. Be like Abraham. That's not what's going on. It's not just that God says something and Abraham does it. Abraham actually understands what God's saying. See, this story is really a story of the wages of sin and the high cost that is earned, that is deserved for us to pay because of our sin. That's what's going on. This story is a story that God's calling in this debt of Isaac's sin, of his family's sin. But why Isaac? Why doesn't God say, Abraham, go offer yourself up? It's because in these ancient times, it was far different than our Western culture. You know, what we live in a culture that says, me, my, I, right? You're not worried, a lot of you, unless you're patriarchs or matriarchs, you're not worried about your family. You're thinking me. How can I get a better job? How can I have good kids? How can I have a good life? How can I? And that's basically our society. It's an individualistic society. That's what we live in. So we don't understand stuff like this. But the society that they lived in was a patriarchal society, which was more centered on the family. And the firstborn son of every family was the head of that family, was the representative of that family, was the one who the buck stops with. So this was Isaac. Isaac was the representative for Abraham and his family. God called Abraham out of darkness into light, but was Abraham sinless? No. He lied about the fact that he was married twice. He was scared and said, no, that's my sister. He was a pagan demon worshiper in Ur. He was a liar. He slept with his wife's maid because he's like, God, you're not going to get it done. I'll get it done. No, their sin was great. And Abraham knew that. And in this society, the firstborn son is the representative. So when God comes to Abraham, get this. When God comes to Abraham and says, get your only son, the one who you love, and offer him up as a sacrifice. Notice that God doesn't say, go to the next tent and stab Isaac. He doesn't say that. He says, get him, take him to the mountain I'll show you, and offer him up as a burnt offering. When God said that to Abraham, Abraham knew that God is holy, that God is good, that God will not sweep sin under the rug. And he knew that sin establishes a debt with God. And he knew that God was calling in that debt. That's why Abraham got up the next morning and went. Because he knew that sin's serious, it has a high cost. And God said, Isaac's the representative. He's going to pay it. Abraham also knew that God had promised that through Isaac, he was going to have great descendants, and the whole world's going to be blessed. So Abraham knew, how's this going to work? God made a great promise, but also sin requires great sacrifice and payment, and he's requiring that. I've got to offer him up for sin. He's told me to. See, think about it this way. Think about if you got a credit card and you ended up racking up quite a bit of debt. A lot of you don't really have to imagine that. If you're like me, you're like, oh, okay, I'm there. Some of you probably will be there someday if you're not right now. Think of school debt, something going on like that. Tons of debt that you rack up. Is it just or unjust for the credit card company to require that you pay back what you spent? It's just, right? I mean, it's not. They're so unjust. I got this credit card. I mean, it was a great interest rate of 33%. I went out and, maxed it out, 10 grand, and they want me to pay it back. It's like, no, anyone that said that, you just probably go and walk away. You wouldn't even take time to say, what are you talking about? But is it just or unjust for them to require payment? It's just. It's good. It's a right thing. Think about someone who embezzled a lot of money from their company. And then in a court of law, they are convicted, and it's clear they are guilty. Is it just or unjust for a judge to sit over them and pronounce a sentence that fits the crime? Totally just. We get that. It's a tough pill to swallow for us when we see that our sin has put us in such a big debt that we can't pay, and that we deserve death and hell and the wrath of God. The truth is, you and I, with our credit card, as it were, have racked up more debt than we could ever pay off. And God sends you that bill and says, you got to pay it. It's not unjust to do that. He's good. He's holy. How do we know? How does this mean that I can know God is good? Here's how. Because he's just. Because he's committed to justice. Because he doesn't look at sin and rebellion and people destroying themselves, destroying their relationship with him, destroying others, and say, sweep that under the rug. No big deal. If a judge did that, we would know that's a bad judge. He's unjust. He's not good. And so when God does that, we know that God is good because he is holy and he is righteous altogether. And he will by no means clear the guilty and just say, that's no big deal. No, he would be unjust if he did that. You don't want a God who just looks at sin and evil and wickedness and says, bad. It's okay. You don't want that because he wouldn't be good. So we can trust that God is good because he requires justice. And you and I, as well as Abraham and Isaac and his whole family, because of our sin, we deserve justice. That's why Abraham went. That's why God called him to offer up Isaac.